can't. Okay.
Okay,
Now I can see your screen.
great. Did you want to offer anyone to say anything before I get started?
No, I think you should just start.
Okay, good. Well, thanks everyone for joining me, and thank you very much, Orient Association, for inviting me to speak at your meeting today. It sounds like everyone has seen that we've initiated a private well survey out in the area focusing on the emerging contaminants, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Barbara had reached out, and Ms. Bennett also reached out and wanted to see if we were available to provide a presentation for everyone. So hopefully, if you don't know all this information, you learned something new today. All right. So what I'd like to discuss today is a background about what PFAS are, where they come from, some of the potential health effects associated with PFAS, the regulations that are in place and are currently proposed. Talk a little bit about some background related to contamination sites and investigations that we've done in the past. I'm just gonna mute folks just so.
One thing I forgot to say, if you have questions, please put them in chat.
Okay. Then we're going to talk a little bit about contamination sites and investigations that the county's been doing, working with the state agencies, the State Department of Health and the State Department of Environmental Conservation. And then we'll focus on our Orient private well survey that we just initiated last week, and then open it up to questions and comments. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, what are they? Where do they come from? So PFAS compounds have been used in a number of consumer products. We've seen them used in firefighting foam, this aqueous film forming foam that's used on fuel fires. They're also generally associated with coatings that repel water, oil, stains, grease. You think about some trade names out there like Scotchgard and what's another big one? Gore-Tex.
Teflon.
Right.
Oh, Gore-Tex.
So they've been used in textiles, food packaging, nonstick cookware, but EPA recognized these as a potential health concern about 2 decades ago, and they spoke with manufacturers in the US about phasing out the production. And then there was a goal to reduce emissions of the PFOA and phase that out by 2015. And as far as we know, they've met these goals. So PFOA and PFOS, the perfluorooctanoic acid and perfluorooctane sulfonate, have been the most extensively produced and studied of the chemicals. There are thousands of these PFAS chemicals out there, but these have been some of the most extensively studied. They are persistent in our environment and in our bodies. So what are the sources of these 2 compounds that the state's focusing on right now with their drinking water standards? PFOA, it's been used in the manufacturing of fluoropolymers like PTFE, the Teflon, like nonstick cooking pans. I'm about 43 years old, so as I was mentioning to some of the members before, I can still remember my mom with the first Teflon pans cooking my eggs and taking the metal spatula and scratching that up into my eggs. We've come a long way since then. It's also was used as a component in the firefighting foams I mentioned from 1965 to 75. PFOS was used in the production of firefighting foams as well, also hydraulic fluids and photolithography, and that's something to use very sensitive computer chips, that process. The major consumer product related uses were water repellent for clothes, stain, dirt resistant for carpets, oil and grease repellents, paper and packaging. New York State has a law right now that was passed. It's going to prohibit the sale of food packaging containing intentionally added or perfluoroalkyl substances at the end of this year. And this diagram from a California site kind of gives us an idea of some of the products out there that contain these emerging contaminants.
Figured it out. Thank you.
We have fast food packaging, candy wrappers, shampoos, water-resistant clothing, nonstick cookware, dental floss, nail polish, cleaning products, paints, sealants, varnishes, pizza boxes, eye makeup, microwave popcorn bags, firefighting foams, stain-resistant, pesticides. This just gives you an idea, a little snapshot of some of the products that we're exposed to that may contain these compounds. So why are we concerned about PFAS? What are these potential health effects that we have to be concerned about? These were slides that Amy Jukatz, our environmental toxicologist, has prepared for another presentation we gave to our Board of Health. So PFAS and PFOA, we know that they're highly persistent. They concentrate in the proteins in the body, and they're cleared slowly, primarily through urination. PFOA, they've done epidemiological studies. They say that there's an increased risk of kidney cancer. There's liver and immune system toxicity. There's an increase associated with our cholesterol levels. And this is a suggestion of preeclampsia or pregnancy-related hypertension. They've also done animal studies with regards to PFOA, and that's confirmed some of the observations above that we mentioned. Also saw thyroid toxicity, developmental and reproductive effects, and cancer. PFOS, a little bit similar, immune system toxicity, increases in cholesterol, altered metabolism of lipids, suggestion of preeclampsia and pregnancy-related hypertension similar to PFOA, inconsistent observations of breast, liver, and pancreatic cancer. As far as the animal studies go with regards to PFOS, liver and immune system toxicity, thyroid toxicity, developmental and reproductive effects, and liver and pancreatic cancer. So how were we exposed? What are some of the pathways that we're exposed to these compounds? Drinking water, a diet, some of the foods that we eat, and we kind of talked about some of those opportunities here, and then through indoor and outdoor air. So where are we at with regard to regulations? So the federal government, is working towards regulating the PFAS compounds, and the state has taken some great strides with their rapid response task force and the Drinking Water Quality Council in regulating these compounds. About 6 years ago is when they sort of got on the radar, is when the public water supply industry was required by the federal government to do what's called unregulated contaminant monitoring. And that was part of their list 3 that they came up with, where they monitor for unregulated contaminants. It's a list of about 30 different contaminants they have to test for at their expense. And at the time they did the monitoring between 2013 and 2015, the results came out in 2016. The minimum reporting levels at that time for these 2 contaminants were 40 parts per trillion and 20 parts per trillion. Some of you that have been getting tested, your private well tested by the health department, you're used to seeing the contaminants listed as parts per million and parts per billion. Now we're getting another several orders of magnitude down into the parts per trillion levels. And for measure of perspective, down at the bottom of the slide, you see that 1 part per trillion is comparable to about 1 second in 31,500 years. It's also equivalent to, let's say, 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So down at these minimum reporting levels, we got data from our local Suffolk County public water supply systems. We saw no detections of PFOA in that testing that was done between 2013 and 2015. We did see 7 detections of PFOS at 5 different well fields, and the highest concentration observed was 530 parts per trillion. At the time, the provisional non-enforceable health advisory levels were 200 part per trillion for PFOS and 400 parts per trillion for PFOA. And what we could really enforce as far as a drinking water standard for the public water supply was the unspecified organic contaminant, sort of a catch-all category, drinking water standard of 50,000 parts per trillion, or 50 part per billion. And we use this catch-all unspecified organic contaminant drinking water standard for new pesticides or pharmaceutical and personal care products that don't have a specific drinking water standard and don't meet the state's principal organic contaminant definition. And a health advisory level is really a conservative estimate. It's designed to protect the most sensitive individuals out there. It's not a bright line between what causes an adverse health effect and what won't cause an adverse health effect. Adverse health effects are really going to vary depending on many factors, including the concentration of the chemical that you're exposed to, the duration of the exposure, and certain individuals' susceptibility to those health effects. So what has the state done since the state very early on adopted an emergency regulation? The DEC adopted an emergency regulation which classified PFOS and PFOA as hazardous substances. What's really important about that is it enabled them to tap into financial resources. So if we see drinking water levels and private water supply wells, it allowed them to tap into those financial resources to be able to provide alternative water supply where there's exposures above a drinking water standard. And in 2020, back in August of 2020, the New York State set drinking water standards of 10 parts per trillion each for PFOS and PFOA. And just recently, earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, the State Health Department proposed new drinking water standards for 4 additional PFAS compounds: PFNA, PFHPA, PFHXS, and PFDA. And they actually proposed a new combined maximum contaminant level for 6 PFAS, including those 4, and 2 additional, the PFAS and PFOA, that are already regulated. The individual standards are 10 parts per trillion, similar to what we see for PFAS and PFOA. And the combined maximum contaminant level for all 6 is 30 parts per trillion. There's a comment period that's going to end in early December, and that drinking water standards should be effective come April of next year is the goal right now. The state also proposed something called the notification level for the public water suppliers. And it's unclear right now how these new proposed drinking water standards and notification levels are going to impact private drinking water wells. Hey, Joe. Come April 1st of next year, when we anticipate these to become effective. You too, Joe. Thanks. What's also great is our analytical technology has gotten a lot better since that original public water supply monitoring under the EPA's unspecified organic contaminant rule. Now we're detecting down to about 2 parts per trillion, well below what the drinking water standards are of 10 parts per trillion. So what are some of the contamination sites and investigations that Suffolk County is looking at with the state agencies? We've been routinely coordinating with the state agencies for about 6 years since that emerging contaminant regulation was enacted with DEC, and they lowered the health advisory level at EPA back then in 2016. So we've been coordinating with them regularly. In areas where there's known or suspected contamination, we've initiated private well surveys, and that's exactly the mechanism and how we've initiated this Orient private well survey that we're going to talk about in a minute. We've initiated 50 different surveys. We've collected about 1,500 domestic well samples. From the testing that we've done working with the state agencies, we've found about 15% of the wells tested were over the New York State maximum contaminant levels that are in place today. The maximum concentration Just to give you sort of a benchmark and compare it to the results that you're seeing, the maximum concentration that we've seen in the surveys is combined PFAS, PFOA of about 1,880 parts per trillion, or this would be 1.88 parts per billion. We've also done a number of groundwater investigations working with the state agencies around the airports, county facilities, and near public water supply wells. We've installed about 200 groundwater monitoring wells. We've collected over 1,000 groundwater samples, and about 11% of the groundwater wells that we've tested were over the maximum contaminant levels. The maximum concentration that we've seen in groundwater, not a drinking water source, but in just general groundwater, was over 15,000 parts per trillion combined PFAS, PFOA. Several of the sites were or became Superfund sites based on the work that we conducted in our Suffolk County Department of Health Services Office of Water Resources. These include Gabreski Airport, Hampton Bays Fire District, Yaphank Firematic site right down the road from our office, East Hampton Airport, and a former Beaumark facility. This was a federal facility that held Cold War era long-range surface-to-air missiles. And the Beaumark stands for Boeing Michigan Aeronautical Research Center missiles that were held at that site back in the day. They've all since been decommissioned, and the property was handed over to Suffolk County. So let's talk about the Orient Private Well Survey. So how did this come about? Well, Suffolk County Department of Health Services, we received PFAS analytical results from a number of sources, including public water supply surveillance testing that we do. There are several transient non-community water supplies in this area, including Oyster Pond School, Opties and Dinghies, United States Postal Service. Who else do we have?
The country store.
Thank you, Barbara. And then the Orient Yacht Club. We go out there every year, and we do have a limited capacity to collect surveillance samples using a 0.25% sales tax money, a grant that we were awarded. We were applied and we were awarded that. So we don't currently have the in-house analytical capability to test for PFAS compounds, but we're working towards that. We have the analytical equipment and the chemist, and we're developing that method, and we hope to have that up and running by the end of this year. So anyone that that has been tested by us in the last several years, you would not have had PFAS testing done as part of that analysis. But hopefully next year we're going to have that as part of our repertoire, and that'll be included as part of a routine group of our comprehensive testing. But so we found some of the test results from our public supply surveillance testing, as well as test wells that we conduct as part of, let's say, new developments that are going in the area. We did that testing as part of our 0.25% PFAS testing with a contract laboratory. And then anyone out there that's developing or redeveloping their property that has to go through our Office of Wastewater Management, their application process, if you have an on-site well, is now going to require you to test for emerging contaminants, including PFAS, PFOA, and 1,4-dioxane. And so their office is coordinated with us for any of these exceedances. And we've obtained a lot of new results based on that. And out of all the testing that we've seen, there were 5 detections that were above the PFOS, PFOA maximum contaminant levels. 4 of the 5 were, I would say, marginally above the drinking water standard of 10 parts per trillion. They were below 20 parts per trillion. They were sort of in that range from 10 to 20. There was 1 detection at a non-community public water supply system. They recently installed a replacement well, and they had seen detections slightly above 100 parts per trillion in that replacement well. And they're working to install treatment. And they're currently posted advising folks of the detection above the drinking water standard. So based on those results, we approached the state agencies and we said, you know, we've got a number of private wells in this area and we'd like to conduct a private well survey. So we work with our hydrogeologists, work with our state Department of Environmental Conservation to define the survey area based on groundwater flow and the available information with respect to the analytical data from those well tests. And we determined this group of 67 properties. I think it's actually 66 now. There was one repeat in there and that had already been sampled. We started this private well survey with the PFAS analytical support from the DEC's contract laboratory. We're offering the sampling and analysis free of charge. As everyone knows, or everyone should know, we conducted our outreach, including mailing letters to the known property owners, last known property owners, and then going door to door, providing the same outreach materials all to the survey area last week. And we've initiated sampling today. Our staff were out there starting to collect samples. We envision, based on the response, it's probably going to take us a few weeks to get through everybody. By last count at the end of last week, I think we've already heard from 28 out of the 66 properties. So just in the few days that homeowners got the notice to the first day of sampling, we've gotten almost 50% response rate, which I think is really good. Obviously, we'd love to see 100% response. We are not only going to be testing for PFAS, but residents in this area, anybody that's been out there for any amount of time, know that, you know, this is a large agricultural community, a large history with that. So we're interested in looking at inorganics, including nitrates associated with fertilizer and things, also on-site septic systems. That's where we could be seeing nitrates, any of the metals, also pesticides, volatile organic compounds and semi-volatile organic compounds, and total coliform E. coli bacteria. And those will be analyzed by our Suffolk County Department of Health Services Public and Environmental Health Laboratory located in Hauppauge. This is the current private well assessment area associated with the survey. You know, we're going to be assessing the analytical results that we get from the private well testing. Based on those results, if the data supports it, we may approach the state agencies about potentially expanding the survey in the future. We may also, you know, consider a possible groundwater investigation depending on the data. But if everybody can see the map, this is essentially Main Road. I think the Candyman is generally up in this area. This is the fire department here for a frame of reference. Essentially going down Tabor Road on the east, Skipper's Lane to the south, a portion of Harbor River Road, and Rackert's Court on the west. So residents within that boundary are definitely encouraged to submit. They should have received outreach notices by now. They're encouraged to submit the application. You can fax us, you can mail it to us. This is our mailing address. I can leave that up for a minute here. We're located in Yaphank, Suite 1C. You can also contact us. So if you are within that boundary and you did not get outreach materials, or you're a tenant and you're interested in sampling, you can certainly contact our office, Office of Water Resources, 631-852-5810. And our staff would be happy to help you complete that application over the phone, take your information and get you, you know, in the backlog for sampling. After we receive your application for sampling, one of our public health sanitarians is going to contact you and they're going to schedule the sample collection event. Sampling is typically conducted, I would say between 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning through about noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Thursday. Okay. So we're going to contact you, schedule that when you're available for sampling. An adult does need to be home for the sampling. We want to get into the home and see sampling pre and post filtration. Many of the homeowners that we've spoken to have existing filtration devices. So granular activated carbon, reverse osmosis units, ion exchange resins. We want to see what's raw from the well, and then we'll be sampling in addition what's after the filtration unit and see what you're actually being exposed to. All right, so we want to be able to get into the home and secure a sample from the kitchen tap or bathroom tap, as well as, you know, hopefully a pre-filtration sample. So after sample collection, what are you going to expect? So if we see a detection that is over a drinking water standard, we're going to reach out to you. If it's PFOS, PFOA, we should be receiving the results based on historical sampling, working with the state's contract lab. It should be getting those results within about a month. And we'll be contacting you. And if it's above a drinking water standard, and then we'll also be reaching out to the state agencies and letting them know that there was an exceedance, and their contractor will be in touch with you about providing an alternative water source. Initially, the interim water source has been bottled water. And then they're going to evaluate whether there's public water available. And, you know, we all know that no Suffolk County Water Authority or other water suppliers' mains are in front of your properties. So what they're probably going to look to do is offer you a point of entry treatment system if you don't currently have a treatment system. If you currently have a treatment system that's effective at removing PFOS or PFOA, they're probably going to indicate, hey, look, based on the testing that's available, it's showing us that it's effective at removing PFOS and PFOA. We encourage you to continue to test that and maintain your existing filtration system. All right. After we receive the whole comprehensive set of analytical results, we'll be providing you a letter summarizing all those results and providing any guidance based on the analytical data. That may take several months until all the results are completed. But if anything is detected above a drinking water standard, including bacteria, iron, manganese, PFOS, PFOA, we will be reaching out and contacting you.
Okay, I've seen some questions in the chat here.
Great.
And one was how are the boundaries set for the study?
Sure. The boundaries, like I said, it was based on our hydrogeologist and the Department of Environmental Conservation's team, their review of the existing analytical results in this area. And, you know, using their knowledge of the groundwater flow direction, which I believe is generally to the
towards the bay, towards Orient Harbor.
Southwest, I'm sorry, southwest towards Orient Harbor. So based on that information, they took an initial phase that they're going to be looking at. And then based on the results from that, they may expand that in the future. But that was basically, it was all the analytical results that they had available to them. And I have that list here. It was generally a small subset. I think it was only about 10 or 12 locations in this area.
Jason, a couple of people have asked to view the map while you're addressing these questions. If you could back the slide up.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go.
And people have asked about if they're outside of the map area, whether you recommend testing. Jason and I have talked about this a little bit, and as of early next year, Suffolk County Department of Health Services will be doing testing for these compounds in their regular water testing. So
That's
I
our
guess
goal.
starting in December, you can sign up for that, something like that in December, January.
I I hope that there'll be an announcement where, hey, look, the county's gone live and we do have that in-house analytical capability. When exactly that's going to be, I mean, that's subject to the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. We have to apply to New York State and get approval of our new method. We want to make sure that we, have everything dialed in and the sensitivity dialed in to give you accurate and repeatable results. So
there are 3 local testing labs that are available, and
right.
I guess we could put them up on our website so people can access them. The testing starts, like, I'll say around $400. And for, I think, both PFAS, both types of PFAS.
Yeah, in the interim, if you're outside of the survey area and if you're concerned about your private well water quality, absolutely, you could reach out to a contract laboratory. There are a couple local contract laboratories, and the cost for the analysis is going to vary. Sometimes they may ask you to submit quality assurance, quality control samples, which are, at additional expense, but that will verify, and we have to collect those when we submit the samples to ensure that there's nothing impacting the sample on the route to the laboratory or at the laboratory itself, to make sure that that's an accurate result. So, as you said, Barbara, those analyses can be anywhere from $350 to even $500, depending on if you get sample collection along with the analysis. But you can contact our office and we can provide you, some local contract laboratories.
Oh, you're saying like the 350 is for taking the water yourself and sending it to a lab?
Very possibly, yeah.
Could be, yeah.
There
More
were,
questions?
just to elaborate on that, I was tested this morning and the technician came in with maybe 20 different bottles and collected individual samples and many different bottles of shapes and sizes for different purposes. So the sampling is pretty complicated.
Right. Well, that was because they're doing more than the PFAS. They're doing a whole range of different things. But if you can get just PFAS. Like if you've had Suffolk County Department of Health Services test your water recently and it was fine, but they didn't test for PFAS, and you want to just do that, you could just get a separate test.
For anyone, I mean, outside the survey area, should we develop that analytical capability around the end of this year, beginning of next year? That right now our private well testing fee is $100. I haven't had any indication that cost is going to change once we have that capability. No one's really discussed that yet. But that would be $100, and we would do a comprehensive test, including 1,4-dioxane and all the other parameters that were mentioned, pesticides, bacteria, and things.
Someone asked, you detected 5 instances of PFAS in Orient. Can you give us a rough idea how many tests were taken, what the percentage of positives was?
Yeah. I mean, as I indicated, I had about 10 or 12 locations. It looks like I had 10 locations that were sampled generally in this vicinity. And we saw about the 5 exceedances.
So that's about 50%.
Of the data that we have available to us. There could have been additional wells that were tested that we're not aware of, and people didn't share their analytical results with us yet, but yes.
Someone asked about if they're positive, what the mitigation remediation solutions are.
Yeah, so for PFOS and PFOA, what we've seen with the public water supply industry, the best available treatment technology that was identified as part of that regulation was granule activated carbon. So several people already, I know from talking to my staff, they already have that on their wells because they had concerns about other contaminants like pesticides in the area. So that granule activated, that same granule activated carbon is going to be effective at removing the PFOS and PFOA. So if you were outside the survey and you had a survey area and you had concerns, I would certainly recommend granule activated carbon. You want to make sure that all the components that are installed as part of those filtration systems are NSF or National Sanitation Foundation or UL Underwriter Laboratory or Water Quality Association approved filtration systems and carbon. And then you got to make sure that you're, getting those things tested
I must be able to hear me.
and maintaining them.
Is it the same type of filter they use for Temec?
Correct. For Temec, they're also using granule activated carbon. If you look on the state health department's website, you're also going to see information on reverse osmosis systems. I don't personally have experience with how long those are going to be effective. So, I couldn't say, all right, reverse osmosis system is going to be effective for a month or 3 months or a year or 2 years. And I don't know how much that's going to vary based on the influent concentration. Suffolk County Water Authority has also done pilot testing with ion exchange resins, and they've seen some good success with removal using ion exchange resins, if any folks out there have that.
I've got 3 questions that relate to the discovering the source or sources of these contaminants. And somebody asked, because this is still a farming community, about pesticides. Somebody asked about fire foam and whether Orient Fire Department had employed that over the years, and just other people are asking what are the possible sources. And also there was a question about the mosquito distic spraying. So I don't know if you have any insight into those things.
So at this point, there's no known source or sources of the PFAS and PFOA detections in this area. As you saw from, where PFAS and PFOA have been used, it's been a number of consumer products and food packaging, the firefighting foam. We have been in contact with the local fire department. We've sampled the local fire department, I think today. According to the representatives that we spoke with, aqueous film forming foam hadn't been used at that site. So, it's really unknown at this point. Our first priority is trying to get the private wells tested. We want to see what people are potentially being exposed to, and then we're going to take it from there based on what we learned from this private well survey.
If you find a large majority are affected, you plan on doing groundwater analysis to try to figure out what the source is, correct?
Yeah, we're going to certainly discuss that with the state agencies. We're really relying on them for the PFAS analytical assistance. So, they have, several priorities statewide, certainly if the data supports that, that's going to be our recommendation.
There was a question, there is a oyster bed, a commercial oyster bed that's directly adjacent to the testing area. Is that something that needs to be looked into?
So the oyster bed would be out actually in the harbor?
Well, it's actually not. If you look at the map and the bottom left of the map, exactly right where you have your cursor is where the oyster bed is.
I see it. Okay.
It's in that little creek there.
Yeah. So in other survey areas, if the data has supported that. We have proposed surface water sampling. And that's certainly something based on the data that we glean from the private well work that we can discuss with the state agencies.
Okay, and I know oysters are filter feeders, so is there something as that the oyster bed owner or the community should do to look into whether oysters accumulate any of these toxins?
That's something that I'm going to have to discuss with some of the other officers. Our Office of Ecology has been looking more at the aquatic biota, the finfish, shellfish, crabs, eels, things like that with respect to PFAS. So I'll certainly bring that up with the group here, and then we'll have to take that up with the state agencies. But I'll
Right.
definitely make mention of that. That's a good question. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
And somebody asked whether Brita filters that you normally put on your kitchen sink, are they effective at all?
So the Brita filters that I'm familiar with in a pitcher, or the ones that attach to the faucet, they do have, the ones that I'm familiar with do have granular activated carbon. There should be some reduction, based on what I've read on the New York State Department of Health website. I don't have any data to support that, to tell you how much reduction, how long there would be a reduction. But because it's the same technology that we're seeing with the POET systems that the state's installing on the private wells, and that the public water suppliers are using, I would assume that there would be some reduction, sure.
It sounds like that's something Brita owners ought to question the manufacturer about, who probably has more knowledge of the specific capabilities.
I mean, it's all going to be dependent on the influent concentration too. So if you have 11 parts per trillion versus 111 parts per trillion, the way they sort of describe granular activated carbon is that there's these very small pore spaces that are on the carbon particle. And each of those pore spaces is going to try to find, one of these PFOS, PFOA molecules. And, if you have more in your water, they're going to take up more of those pore spaces faster. So that's why, it's hard for me to gauge, how effective those are going to be long term.
Someone just asked whether it's advisable to currently drink the water if you're in the testing area.
So that's a personal decision, something that you may want to, seek guidance from your medical professional. If you do have specific questions related to PFAS, PFOA, and health concerns, we do have a number for the New York State Department of Health that I can share. We refer people to them if there's specific health-related questions. And that's the Bureau of Environmental Exposure and Investigation up at the New York State Department of Health. And their phone number is 518-402-7860. Again, that's the New York State Department of Health, Bureau of Environmental Exposure and Investigation. And for specific health-related questions with regards to PFOS, PFOA, you can contact them at 518-402-7860. If you, have some significant concerns, and if you want to use, an alternative water source in the interim, that's up to you. You need to make that decision for yourself and your family. And, I would certainly, encourage you, if you're going to go bottled water, to look for New York State Department of Health certified bottled water. There should be an NYS DOH cert number on the side of the bottled water.
A couple of questions just came in.
Sure.
Somebody asked whether one of the testing sites was the elementary school in Orient, and whether that had any results that you can discuss.
Yeah, we could discuss the public water supply testing for sure. So we did do a sample at the Oyster Ponds Elementary School. The most recent results I had available to me, we just looked at this last week in preparation for another conference call, actually during a conference call. And we had detections right at the minimum reporting level. I think they were in that 2 part per trillion range based on last year's testing.
Someone asked, does well depth matter at all?
It all depends what the source or sources and, you know, the fate and transport of these chemicals are. So where the release occurred, how quickly it moved down through the aquifer. I really couldn't say at this time. If you know what your well depth is, that may prove useful to us in the future should we need to do a groundwater investigation. So yeah, if you have the well record, your well completion report, yeah, certainly have that handy and share that with us.
I think you should also pay attention to how recently, if someone has a reverse osmosis filter, how recently it was serviced, because it would be good to know whether reverse osmosis filters are working and for how long. I mean, Augusta asked about the question of how long these filters work. The way they work is like a sponge. They absorb the contaminants, but at a certain point they're full. So then they start sloughing off the contaminants, and the contaminants just go right through, and they don't get filtered anymore.
That's a great point, Barbara. I'm glad you brought that up. So that's the key to, you know, continually testing. I mean, our recommendation for general private well owners is to have your well sampled once per year, because water quality changes over time, and your point of use filtration systems that you may have installed, their efficacy with removing chemicals could change over time. So if you have, let's say, pesticides in your water, and then you have PFOS or PFOA or another organic, that's going to take up those pore spaces in the carbon. And then, as Barbara mentioned, it's going to start to slough off. You may see actually higher concentrations on the effluent of the treatment system than you do on the influent if you run that through past breakthrough. So it's a great point.
A couple of people have asked for the contact numbers and a better description of the carbon filters, and maybe we can put that on our website in the next day or so. If
You mean
Barbara,
the local companies that do carbon filters?
well, a better description of the carbon filters. I think people got caught up in the technical description of the carbon and may need a little bit more explanation. And there were a couple of contact numbers with the state. Why don't Jason and Barbara and I collect all those, and either we'll send them out as an email blast or put them on our website.
I'll say that the type of carbon filter that they're talking about, I think I described it. It goes preferably in your basement, and it's a 5-foot tall tank, and it, of like, I don't know, a foot diameter, or maybe a little more. Depends on how big your house is and how many bathrooms you have and how much water you use.
Right.
And the maintenance on it, I think the state provides maintenance on it if they're the ones who are installing the tank. But if not, it costs about $800. Could be yearly. Again, it depends on what your situation is, how much water you use, and how contaminated it is.
Right.
A reverse osmosis filter is usually under your kitchen sink with a separate spout, and it's a little bit less expensive to install and less expensive to maintain, but we're not 100% sure how often you need to get it maintained to filter out PFAS. And again, it probably depends on how much water you use and what your contaminant levels are. Is that accurate, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very well said. Thank you, Barbara.
Somebody asked, there are some community wells in the Browns Hill subdivision in Orient, whether they had been tested or what, just brought that up as an issue.
Sure.
Well, they would have been tested because the Suffolk County Water Authority would have to test them.
Correct. They would be tested since back in 2013, I think, back when the Suffolk County Water Authority did the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule testing. And then after that ended, Suffolk County Department of Health Services proactively required these public water suppliers to continue monitoring for PFOS, PFOA, 1,4-dioxane. So yeah, they would have a long history of analytical results. Browns Hills isn't on my radar. So I'm not sure if they haven't had detections or if they just aren't high enough to be on my radar.
Getting muted.
Does Suffolk County Water Authority, can you foil them to find out? Can one can one foil them to find out what the levels are?
Yeah,
in the process?
absolutely. Or you can actually look right on their website. Their website has that information.
I'll be right
I've
back.
been trying to put a message in for over half an hour. I keep
Okay.
getting muted. Now,
Okay, well, ask your
please-
question. Ask your question.
Is there any chance that Suffolk County Water Authority water can be made available to replace private wells?
Well,
So that's not a decision that I think
I'm
Orient
asking if there's a
Association,
possibility,
Suffolk County Health Department. Yeah, of course, anything's a possibility. That would be up to Suffolk County Water.
because my understanding is that local groups have determined they don't want Suffolk County water. They want to stick with wells.
yeah, well,
Is true or not?
Suffolk County, yeah, yes, that is true, that historically, a lot of Orient residents have rejected Suffolk County Water Authority.
That doesn't seem to be a wise idea if the water is contaminated.
Well, Suffolk County Water Authority
Well, what I'm asking is,
takes their water.
can the
from-
people who make these decisions give those who want Suffolk County water the opportunity to have it rather than to drink contaminated water?
If there's interest in connecting to a public water supplier, you're certainly more than welcome to reach out to Suffolk County Water Authority and discuss that with them. I think before they're able to extend public water, they need a certain percentage of properties to sign up and pay, money to be able to justify that public water main extension. So by all means, you're more than welcome to reach out to Suffolk County Water Authority, and their contact information will be on their website, www.scwa.com. And then their annual water quality report with information about Browns Hills and the testing that's been done there. That'll also be on their website.
But at this point, we don't know the extent of the contamination. So there's, we rang the alarm bells, but we don't know that we don't know how bad the situation is or how good it is. So I just want to point out that we don't know that there's a need to take any drastic action.
There was another question, whether the health risks are solely or primarily related to ingestion of possibly contaminated water. I know Jason had talked about a little bit about this before our session. Maybe he could summarize again the differences between ingestion and, say, crop watering or bathing or whatever.
So based on the information that we've obtained from New York State Department of Health, the primary routes of exposure and the concern would be ingestion, whether that be through food or drinking water, as opposed to dermal absorption or inhalation. Those are less of a concern, not as significant of a route of exposure to the PFOS and PFOA at the concentrations we're seeing.
All I can say is, I don't think a group of people have the authority or the right to deprive other people of the chance to get water that is safe, Suffolk County water. I think this is the obvious alternative at this point, and it seems that you want to reject it out of hand.
I think Al, would you like to respond to that, Al Krupski?
Well,
You have your-
thank you. Not to respond to that so much. I have a question for Jason and
Oh.
thank him for coming up with a good presentation here. You mentioned the Browns Hills and the fact that there's been a water vendor there selling water for a number of years that's had to be tested by the health department for all contaminants to meet all state regulations. I wonder, is that so that area wasn't considered for the testing? So did your team look at those numbers and say, no, this is an area that's not of concern? And is there any other history of water testing in Orient that would help with this survey? Is the school tested on a regular basis?
Oyster Pond School was tested at least last year. I want to say we did it again this year. That was our goal with that 0.25% funding through the Water Quality Protection and Restoration Program. We tried to do all the non-communities again this year where we had the resources. At Browns Hills, we get the analytical test results from Suffolk County Water Authority. As I indicated, they're not on the list that they send me. They send me updates at least once a quarter, and they give me everything that's over half of the maximum contaminant level. So that would be anything that's above 5 parts per trillion. And I don't see the Browns Hills wells on the list. So I don't know if they're non-detect or somewhere below 5.
And
so
you
the
laid
thing-
out, and thank you, Jason, you laid out very good that 1 part per trillion is 1 second in 35,000 years.
31,500, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, not 35,000. Sorry, I was exaggerating.
The other thing is there's very little data available because Suffolk County Department of Health Services doesn't test yet for these compounds. So there are very few data points in Orient. It would only be if someone's digging a new well, or I guess putting a new septic system in. Do they have to also submit results?
So if you supplied if you had to submit an application to our Suffolk County Department of Health Services Office of Wastewater Management, then you would be required to do the private well test if you had an on-site well. So we would get the data from that after, I want to say it was late 2020 when we added that requirement.
And that'd be helpful to get any kind of other information you can have, give a historical context to to this new what do they call them? Contaminants, emerging contaminants concern. So thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Legislator Krupke.
Somebody asked whether a Temic filter is the same as a backwashing granular activated carbon filter.
So the Temic filter should be granule activated carbon. That's what I saw the contractors installing years ago when we found the aldecarb compounds out there. So it should be the same. If there's any question, I certainly recommend that you reach out to your routine service provider and just confirm that you have granule activated carbon. I see a hand up with Ms. Gold.
Yeah,
I don't know if you want to.
yeah, Lorelei Goebel, do you want to ask a question?
Yes. Thank you, Barbara. It was a little more complicated to put in the chat. First, I wanted to say that, of course, everybody wants to have safe water. However, just to answer, I'll give you a little background as to why we don't have public water. Is we had one of our recent residents who not so long ago passed away, fought to keep it out. And one of the reasons that a lot of people fought to keep it out was because of development. The public water comes in, you have a lot more development that can occur and things like that. So Orient has been very protective of that. And the fact that we stopped public water from coming in was one of the reasons that we don't have condos at the point we have a park. Okay, so whether you're on whatever side of the fence, you like development, you don't like development, I'm not here to criticize that, but that was one of the reasons we kept to not having public water in here, because it restricted the development, and which does affect, regardless, your water supply. And a lot of these wells that are being tested, according to this report, were public water supply wells. So it wasn't like that water was any safer than what we're consuming now, because they said these are public wells, this is the public. So it's getting into the system, whether you have public water or private water. And I think we really just have to step back and say, okay, what are we actually looking at here before we jump the gun? But that's some of the history as to why we didn't right away jump to public water. And if you're one who likes having the park at the end, that's one of the reasons we have a park and not condos, is my understanding. So that's just to clarify a little bit of what goes on in Orient, and just to help you maybe get an idea of where you want us to go. So thank you for letting me speak.
Yes, thank you. There was a question about whether there will be any kind of report available, or would we have to foil it, or?
I don't envision a report. I mean, we've done a number of these over the last several years. I want to say it's very rare a report is done. If people wanted the results, we have had people do freedom of information requests, but I want to assure the homeowners out there that are getting their private wells tested, we do not share your name. We don't share your specific street number. We may share your road name, but that would be what we would release in response to a freedom of information request. We do share your specific address with cooperating agencies like the state DEC and state DOH, because we want to make sure that you get the support that you deserve and need.
Right. Are there other questions there, Tony?
Someone asked whether what a potential source would just be the large number of private septic systems in Orient. Is that a typical source of PFAS?
I wouldn't rule anything out at this point. It's really unknown. We just don't have a smoking gun, we'll say, at this point in time.
Any more questions?
If I could we get Jason just to send out the current smoking gun sources that we know about, that were in a lot of different commercially used and commonly used products, so we'd have everybody would have a good idea of, because a lot of these of where the contamination could come from, because a lot of these things that I've been involved with at the county level involve very well documented cases of firefighting foam, and the site in Grumman, the old Grumman there in Calverton, is a prime example of, they used it to train, when they were building aircraft there. So they used it. It was documented that it was used and how much and the locations, and so that source was easy to see where it originated from. But at of course much higher levels, because they use quite a bit of it for training. So to have, Jason, if you could send out the current, that you mentioned them, the current list of things that's perfect. If you could make that available.
That's on the New York State Department of Health website,
That's,
which has a lot of information about PFAS.
and it gives us an idea of what we've done to our planet. So thank you.
Yeah.
Legislator Krupski, I think you're right. I think one of the most significant PFAS sources that we've seen thus far in the county has been the aqueous film forming foam. We found that, it's certainly down the road, with our fire training facility, airports and things, known release sites where we know aqueous film forming foam was used or there was training conducted. We're also looking at landfills, active and inactive, working with state DEC and DOH because of past disposal of many of these consumer products and other things. So what the known sources, I don't know at this point in time. I think that this is the best guess that we can go with right now, and other things that you'll see. I mean, we refer homeowners when we provide your analytical results. We provide information. It may have even been on the notifications that you received as part of the outreach for the survey. We provide a link to the ATSDR website. That's the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And they have some great information. That's a very reputable source for information on PFOS and PFOA.
And the EPA too.
EPA, absolutely, as well. And we should see a lot more information come out from the EPA as they're considering federal drinking water standards. They're releasing more and more information, seems like every month.
I think you somewhat addressed this question, but it's popped up again, that if it turns out that this PFAS contamination is widespread, is there a process to investigate the source of the contametation?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done this several times. As I showed the slide earlier, we did several groundwater investigations, looking for the potential source. What our team does, we have a group of very qualified hydrogeologists, and they're looking at groundwater contour maps and well placement. We have a well drilling team, and they go out and they'll install something called a profile well. And what that is they sink that down deep into the aquifer, and they'll collect a sample, and then they'll pull it back 5 or 10 feet, collect another sample, pull it back another 5 or 10 feet, collect another sample. And that way they can get not only, let's say, the spatial extent of contamination, but they, aren't going to miss anything in the vertical extent when they're doing their investigation activities. So.
And I would add that is, it's common in the aquifer is very variable. So depending on how deep your well is, where you're getting your water, like your neighbor might have a high concentration of PFAS and you don't. Is that?
Yes, we've seen that.
Jason?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it depends on the groundwater flow direction, and again, the screen zone. I mean, you got to think of it as 3-dimensionally and where that contamination could be flowing in the aquifer.
And just to clarify, because somebody asked that the investigation into the source is prospective based on finding more widespread contamination. I think that's, I may be putting words in your mouth, that with the limited data you have now, you have not tried to, yet to date, you haven't tried to track down the source.
As we said, our first priority, and I think that, I don't want to speak for the state, but I believe the state's first priority is trying to make sure that, the public isn't exposed to anything, excessive that would be, wildly over the drinking water standards. And we want to try to mitigate that potential exposure as quickly as possible. And then, we'll start to to look for that source as maybe a next step. And that's going to be based on several factors. I mean, if we get, a high concentration out there, we may just be looking right around that high concentration. If there's widespread, contamination just over the drinking water standard, that may be enough justification to prioritize this for a groundwater investigation.
Someone asked about what the flow is, the watershed flow.
As
And
far
I
as-
think you mentioned that it goes
Sure, let's bring that.
southwest. So basically it's flowing into the harbor.
That is the regional groundwater flow based on my conversations with our hydrogeologist. I mean, it's going to vary depending on where you are in here. Down here, it might be a little bit more southerly. Over here, maybe a little bit more southwesterly, and over here, maybe, more westerly than southerly. So it's going to vary depending on where you are. But generally, I would think going over towards the harbor.
Okay, have we answered everyone's questions, more or less? Yes. So maybe we should close. Thank you very much, Jason. That was really helpful, I think. And we'll put some more information up on our website. And if people have questions for us, you can always go to the Orient Association website and we'll get those questions. And you can also feel free to call Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. Our number was up there, 852-5810. And if you know any of your neighbors or anything, or seasonal homeowners, if they've already, they're only out on weekends or something like that, and they haven't gotten the notice yet, please help us. If they're in the survey area, please let them know and have them reach out to our office. So help spread the message, spread the word. More testing, the
Yeah.
better.
And there's no deadline, but the sooner the better. And hopefully we can incorporate some of this data into our water study as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Orient Association. This was fantastic.
Thanks,
Lots of
Jason.
Information. Thank you.
Awesome.
You're
Thank you very
welcome.
much.
Thanks for joining us.
Have a
All
great
right.
night, everyone.
So you're going to end it, Jason?
Yeah, that's fine, Barbara.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Good night, everyone.